Welcome to my analysis of Theme for English B. I'm Adam Webb. There's a really simple question that tends to catch us off guard. It's a very basic question, one that takes several forms. One we are often asked, yet one for which we can never produce an adequate answer. That question is, who are you? In the poem we look at today, Theme for English B, a 22-year-old black man faces this question. We will get into themes of race and identity. We will see that race informs but does not determine identity. We'll be looking at some other themes throughout this poem as well. This analysis actually has the potential to be several hours long, but I'll do my very best to keep it concise, all while making sure I touch on all the important points. Alright, so let's get into it. First, I'll read the poem. Theme for English B by Langston Hughes. The instructor said, "Go home and write a page tonight, and let that page come out of you. Then it will be true." I wonder if it's that simple. I am 22, colored, born in Winston-Salem. I went to school there, then Durham, then here to this college on the hill above Harlem. I am the only colored student in my class. The steps from the hill lead down into Harlem, through a park, then I cross St. Nicholas, 8th Avenue, 7th, and I come to the Y, the Harlem Branch Y, where I take the elevator up to my room, sit down, and write this page. It's not easy to know what is true for you or me at 22, my age. But I guess I'm what I feel and see and hear. Harlem, I hear you. Hear you, hear me. We two, you, me, talk on this page. I hear New York too. Me? Who? Well, I like to eat, sleep, drink, and be in love. I like to work, read, learn, and understand life. I like a pipe for a Christmas present. Or records. Bessie, Bob, or Bach. I guess being colored doesn't make me not like the same things other folks like who are other races. So will my page be colored that I write? Being me, it will not be white. But it will be a part of you, instructor. You are white. Yet a part of me, as I am a part of you. That's American. Sometimes perhaps you don't want to be a part of me, nor do I often want to be a part of you. But we are, that's true. As I learn from you, I guess you learn from me. Although you are older and white and somewhat more free. This is my page for English B. We'll come back to the poem's title in a little while. For now, let's look at the first stanza. We see here that the poem features a teacher and a student. Later we'll see that the speaker is a college student. So the instructor mentioned here in line 1 is a lecturer or a professor. He's giving the speaker an assignment. The assignment seems easy on the surface. He wants the young man to go home and write a page about himself. But if you look at these lines carefully, you will begin to see some interesting things. First of all, the direct words of the speaker, which are in italics, don't sound like the rest of the poem. In that, while the rest of the poem is written in free verse, meaning there's no pattern in rhyme or meter, the instructor's words have rhyme and rhythm. Listen. Go home and write a page tonight, and let that page come out of you. Then it will be true. We see end rhymes in write and tonight, and also in you and true. Also, we get a rhythm that sounds like an iambic tetrameter. I won't get into that here, but you can watch my lesson on rhythm and meter for more details. I want to keep this analysis focused on the main points. And the main point here is, while the speaker's monologue throughout the poem has no pattern to it, the instructor's words are very poetic, very deliberate. This reflects how astute, how academic, how educated, how wise the instructor is. After all, he's a man of literature, perhaps even a man of poetry. Also, the difference between how the instructor's words and how the speaker's words are structured highlights a contrast between both personae. One part of that contrast is, while the professor is certain of his identity, the student is not as certain. The rhyme and meter reflect certainty, while the free verse reflects pondering, questioning. We'll get deeper into the contrast as we proceed. There are even more interesting things you should note about this assignment that the professor gives the student. We see that he is asking for a one-page paper that can be written in one night. So it sounds easy. But the trick is, that page must come out of the speaker. It must be one page that can define the speaker. The page must be true, authentic, profound. It can't be something like, "Hi, my name is Adam. I'm 22. I like blue. Blah, blah, blah." This one page must contain deep insight into this young man as an individual. I'm not actually 22, by the way. Let's circle back to the title for a moment. Theme for English B. We can now assume that the student is in an English B class, which might be some kind of English composition class, or it could even be a literature class. In our context of CSEC, English B equals literature. This may or may not be the case for the speaker. In any case, he's writing something in this class. The teacher here, the instructor, is probably discussing various themes that come up in whatever texts they're reading. Perhaps one of these themes is identity, and so the student's assignment is to write about their own identity. Let's jump down to stanza 2. We open with a rhetorical question. The statement, grammatically speaking, isn't a question and does not require a question mark. That further highlights the uncertainty of the speaker. It seems he doesn't even know what a question is. Anyhow, this line tells us the conflict of the poem. The speaker is not sure of his identity. We will see that one of the major factors that contribute to his uncertainty is race. The poem was almost certainly written in the 1950s, a time when America was even more racist than it is now. While we look at this particular young man in the poem, note that his uncertainty, his plight, his problem, his position might represent the position of the black man or the black person in America in general, particularly in the 1950s. There's a rich and complex historical context to consider, but in the interest of time, I'll just stay within the poem and work through the lines. So in this line, the speaker is asking himself whether writing about who he is really as simple as it seems. Sometimes something looks easy until we try doing it. The rest of the stanza is the boy attempting to write about who he is. He's probably working on the first draft of his assignment. He's 22 and colored. So he's a young black man in America. We see that he was born in Winston-Salem. He also went to school there. Winston-Salem is in North Carolina. Then he moved to Durham, another city in North Carolina. Finally, he moved to where he currently goes to school, Harlem. This school he now attends could have been Bernard Women's College, but it's much more likely to be Columbia University, an Ivy League school. Let's pause here and take a look at the speaker's journey. He was born in Winston-Salem, went to school there, then moved to Durham, and he moved again to attend this college on the hill above Harlem. Pay attention to hill above Harlem. Literally, Columbia University is situated above Harlem, but the literal meaning here isn't as interesting as the implied meaning. Harlem is one of the centers of black culture. It is in a neighborhood in Upper Manhattan, New York City. Seeing how the line is phrased, it seems as if the speaker is looking down on, or is now above, the black life, the black culture. He has moved a few times throughout his life, and he seems to have been moving up. He is coming from humble beginnings, and now he's attending one of the best schools in the country. Being on the hill, now he is literally on top. But the top of the hill is pretty white. The speaker, according to the next line, is the only black student in his class. He says colored, which fits the language of the 50s. So here he's at a top school, a place that should afford him bragging rights, opportunity, prestige, even power. But in these times, opportunity, prestige, and power were associated not with black people, but with white people. Anyhow, this black boy has risen, or is rising, to a position of power. What is the cost of this power? What is the cost of this upward mobility? It is social isolation. He is the only black student in the class, and perhaps one of the few in the entire school. He certainly feels out of place. And keep in mind that whatever racism you know to be happening in the US right now, you can multiply that by 10 to get a picture of what this young man would be facing. Before we move on, note that we are seeing a complicated interplay of race, class, and belonging. This young black boy has been elevated to this grand college, but think of how lonely he must be. His own race mates might despise or envy him for attending this predominantly white college. So we can imagine that he's getting hate from his fellow black people, who might envy and even disown him. And he's also getting hate from the white people around him, who might think that he, a black boy, doesn't deserve to be in a place like this. Let's move down to the next line. The steps from the hill lead down into Harlem. Again, we see that Harlem is said to be in a low position. You don't go up into Harlem, but down into Harlem. We continue to see the perceived inferiority of blackness, of black culture. Yet, we'll see that the speaker lives in Harlem. So, on one hand, he is on the hill, surrounded by white people, by opportunity and power. But on the other hand, he still lives in Harlem. This indicates the speaker's internal conflict. He wants to become a high achiever. He wants success and a meaningful life. But he cannot escape the limitations set upon him by his blackness. We'll see as we continue that the speaker isn't trying to escape his blackness, but rather the whole limiting construct of race itself. Literally, from here until the end of the stanza, the speaker is just describing his route from college to home. He takes some steps that lead from the hilltop to Harlem. Then he goes through a park, then he crosses at St. Nicholas, 8th Avenue, 7th, and then he comes to the Y. The Harlem Y is the YMCA branch in Harlem. Think of it as a kind of charity community center where people can live. This hints that the speaker, while attending this Ivy League school, is from a poor background. He probably sees education as his way forward. Education is so important to him that he has worked hard enough to get into a great school and is willing to study in a predominantly white environment where he most certainly experiences racism or at least social isolation. We know that education is important to him also because he mentions his previous schools, so we get the idea that education is an ongoing endeavor for this young man. After reaching the Y, he takes the elevator up to his room and sits down to do the assignment. The question is, what is the importance of the speaker narrating his journey from school to home? For one, it gives a lot of detail of the poem's setting. We can see that he is in an urban environment. There are lots of busy streets and a lot is happening around him. But these lines do something even more important. They show that even though there's a lot of social distance between the black and white people, the black life and the white life, both communities are physically close. If he can walk from school to home, then it can't be that far. This juxtaposition might suggest that overcoming the barrier of race and living in unity is certainly achievable. After all, the black and white communities are neighbors. All we need to do is put our differences aside and try to understand each other. There's another significance of these lines. While the distance between the college on the hill and the speaker's home is not great, we see that the journey is quite complicated. The speaker lists out a number of steps he must take, checkpoints he must reach, on the journey between school and home, almost as if it is a tiresome obstacle course. This tells us that there are many obstacles one must overcome, much effort one must make to understand a person of a different community, of a different race, even if they are your neighbor. But just as he's willing to take this journey to school and back, he's willing to take the journey to understanding others. And he wants the white people, as we will see later, to understand and accept him as well. There is another reason why the speaker lists out all of the steps he takes to get from school to home. It shows that even though the school is physically nearby, it is an extremely difficult task for a black person to get into such a top-notch school. The physical journey reflects the great effort he had to make to get into Columbia. Back then, black people had much less opportunity to attain this kind of education. But through his effort and perseverance, he had made it to this coveted hilltop. In the next stanza, the speaker realizes that he isn't yet experienced enough to really know himself deeply. At 22, do you really know who you are and where you're headed in life? The speaker is saying that this isn't just his own problem, but every youth's problem. And he even pulls us into the poem, talking directly to the reader. He's saying, no one can really know themselves at such a young age. But he might also be addressing the professor as he drafts his one-page assignment. He might be saying, "Mr. Professor, you might know yourself well now, but you could not have had that same wisdom and understanding when you were my age." This levels the playing field between the professor and the student. Going to the next line, the speaker, though he admits how difficult it is to come to an understanding of himself, hazards a guess. We see his continued uncertainty in "I guess." He guesses that he is what he feels, sees, and hears, which is Harlem. This means he's a product of his environment. He lives in Harlem, and so much of his identity comes from how the neighborhood has influenced him, comes from his interactions with the people who live around him. He says that he hears and feels Harlem. This is a metaphor. What he really means is he understands Harlem. It is familiar to him. It makes sense to him. Personally, it is difficult for me not to mention that I'm from Jamaica when I introduce myself to someone. It's just such a significant part of who I am. In the next line, we see that while he hears Harlem, Harlem hears him too. He is in a conversation with Harlem. The "you" here is Harlem. On this page, the speaker is having a dialogue with his community. Certainly, this is personification. But what does this dialogue between the speaker and the neighborhood represent? Well, it means just as Harlem informs his identity, he also informs the identity of Harlem. We are a product of our environment, but our environment is in turn a product of us. Jamaica, in a way, has made me who I am. In turn, I and other Jamaicans make Jamaica what it is. The speaker cannot separate himself from Harlem, or Harlem from himself. Here, Harlem might represent his blackness, and so he might be saying his race is inescapable. It is a part of him that he cannot escape any more than he can escape his own skin. Let's dig a little deeper into this tricky line. The speaker is talking with Harlem, or well, he's actually asking Harlem to talk to him. He's trying to understand himself by understanding his relationship to the community. But the "you" here, in a secondary way, might also refer to the professor. He's saying, "I am writing this one-page assignment for you." But it is not a monologue, but a dialogue. Through this assignment, we have an opportunity to understand each other. The "you" here might even be referring to the reader. He's including us in the conversation on this journey towards self-discovery and also mutual appreciation for one another. In parentheses, he says that he hears New York too. New York here literally means New York City, but might also refer to the whole state of New York. He means just as his neighborhood has shaped him, the wider community, the city, or even the state also affects who he is. But this part is in brackets, which means the impact of the wider community is not as strong as the impact of the more immediate community. While Jamaica impacts my identity, my neighborhood, my family, my household impacts me much more profoundly. There's another reason why the speaker separates New York from Harlem. Even though Harlem is inside of New York, Harlem is its own world and has its own culture. Being a predominantly black neighborhood, the Harlem experience is different from the general New York experience. So even though black people live in America, they are still kind of living within their own walls. Even though he seemed to be making headway in finding out who he is, by the end of the stanza, the question comes right back around. This time, it is even more pointed. He's asking, me who? So he still has not pinned down who he really is. Look at how messy stanza 3 is. So many punctuations to look at. What draws our attention might be the dashes. These dashes act as caesuras, or sudden pauses, and they show us the working of the man's mind. When you're thinking, especially about something complicated, it's not a smooth, linear process, but one with lots of pauses and backtracks and U-turns. The pausing here indicates that he's confused, unsure. He doesn't yet have it figured out. We hear the winding flow of his thoughts also in the repetition in the line. Look at "I hear you, hear me," for example. He can't seem to get his thoughts straight. and he's certainly having a hard time putting this assignment together. Since this student has begun drafting his assignment, has he actually come up with anything that resembles a good answer? He doesn't actually talk about his identity. He instead just lists some personal information, his age and race and where he goes to school. He also talks about where he used to live and study. But is this his identity? Then he talks about his journey to his room, which is pretty much irrelevant to the question at hand. Then in stanza 3, he talks about his connection to Harlem, but that still does not answer the question of who he is. Let's go to stanza 4, where he makes another attempt. In the first 4 lines, he talks about things he likes. He likes to eat, sleep, drink, and be in love. He likes to work, read, learn, and understand life. But these things are pretty unremarkable, impersonal. These are just generic things that most people like. They can't define him as an individual. He likes a pipe for a Christmas present, which is also unsurprising. Pipes were normal Christmas gifts back then. So were records. Look at the music he likes: Bessie, Bop, and Bach. Bessie Smith was a famous blues singer. Bop is a kind of jazz, and Bach, as we all know, did classical music. So he likes a very wide range of music genres, which makes his interest in music very unspecific. Another thing to note here is that since he likes such a wide range of music, he might be suggesting that he doesn't fit the stereotypes you might have of him. Who would think that a young black man would be into classical music? I may be black and poor, but I still have a refined taste. And if you want to know who I am, then you have to look past my blackness to figure it out. So at first, he tried to understand who he is by looking at where he's from. That failed, so now he tries to understand who he is by looking at his habits and hobbies. This still isn't an acceptable answer, but he's making progress. We get some interesting alliteration, repetition, and rhythm in these lines. We see the repeated I like, which adds to the steady rhythm of the lines. We hear the alliterated L sound in well, I like to eat, sleep, drink, and be in love. We also get it in learn and life. We have the alliterated B sound in Bessie, Bop, and Bach. The rhythm and alliteration tell us that he's getting into a rhythm as he drafts the assignment. Remember, since the beginning of the poem, when the professor spoke, the rhythm and meter, the poetic lines, have represented certainty and confidence, while messy, disorganized lines have signaled confusion. Here, we see that he's getting close to the truth about himself, even though he isn't there yet. He's getting into the groove, into the rhythm, as it were. In the next 2 lines, he comes to an important realization. He realizes that being colored, being black, doesn't mean he can't like things people of other races like. In other words, his race has nothing to do with what he likes. So here, he hasn't found the answer to who he is, but he discovers that the answer to the question cannot be found in his race. To understand himself, he must look past the color of his skin. All of a sudden, it doesn't matter that he's black, or that he's the only black student in the class, because that has nothing to do with his true identity. Another thing that is reinforced by these lines is that since he likes the same things as white people, race does not affect one's taste, one's preferences. So the question is, besides pigmentation, is a black man really different from a white man? We'll move on soon, but look at the activities he lists in the first line of the stanza. What he is really saying is, I'm human. Eating, sleeping, drinking, and even being in love are fundamental for humans. Whether you're black or white, you will still do and feel these things. These aren't race things, but human things. He wants to be seen not as a black person, but as a person. He wants you to see his true self, the self that is beyond the skin. He himself wants to discover what this true self looks like. Going down, he asks a very important question, one that will settle the debate of whether race informs identity. So, will my page be colored that I write? He's asking, will my assignment, will my paper, will my discussion of who I am reflect and reveal my race? When I answer the question of who I am, will race be a central factor that comes up? Is my blackness crucial to who I am? If a stranger reads my paper, will they be able to guess that I am black from what I write and from how I write? In the next line, he doesn't answer that question, but instead tells us that the page will definitely not be white, as he is not white. Meaning, whether or not my blackness is important to my identity, what I know for sure is that blackness and not whiteness is at least a part of my identity. So he is really wondering about the extent to which race factors into who he is. He knows he's black. He's not delusional. He's not crazy. He knows he's not white or raceless. He knows that he is a part of a race. But is this race, is black all that I am? Is black the most important part of who I am? That's what he's trying to work out. The color of the page being black or white is of course a metaphor that is talking about race, but it may also be a pun. The page will certainly not be white because he will write on it with his black pen, I suppose. Let's continue to think about the page and the ink as metaphorically representing race. The page's whiteness is white, and the ink's blackness is black. Something interesting happens when you write on a page. The black ink must work with the white page to produce the writing. There must be cooperation between the ink and page. While there is distinction between them, there must also be harmony between them. And that is what the speaker is talking about in the next 2 lines. In the next 4 lines, through metaphor, the speaker says that although he is black and his professor is white, they are intimately connected to each other. The page he writes about himself will also be about the teacher. This means they share many commonalities. We can assume that the professor also likes to eat, sleep, drink, and be in love. He perhaps likes music and smoking as well. He certainly likes reading and learning, since he teaches English or literature. The student is saying, if you look past race, Mr. Professor, you will see that we are very much alike. The speaker is saying to the teacher, even though you are white and I am black, just like this page and the ink from my pen, we are a part of each other. In the very next line, the speaker asserts that this is American. Unity, community, connection is the true American way. This phrase, which gets a line for itself, is very powerful. Remember, we're in the 1950s here, when racism and segregation are hitting really hard. Yet, the speaker, who is ahead of his time, is saying that unity is the true American way. America is a melting pot where not just the black and white, but many races and ethnicities live together. But it goes deeper than that. Not only do they both have the common ground of being American, despite their difference in race, but their existences affect one another. Whatever the teacher, a white man, does affects the speaker, a black man, and vice versa. In a more personal sense, the instructor affects the speaker's life by being his teacher, and even by inspiring him to think about his identity. In turn, the speaker affects the teacher by being his student. Teachers learn from students just as students learn from teachers. Specifically, this assignment that the speaker will submit will certainly impact the professor and give him a fresh perspective on race and identity. The next 2 lines are sobering. The speaker says that even though he and the teacher are connected, sometimes the connection is unwanted. Often, people of different races don't want to interact with one another for various reasons. One of the most significant reasons might be a lack of mutual understanding. In particular, this line talks about the racial tensions in the US in the 1950s, the segregation, the racism, the blind hatred. Why wouldn't the speaker want to be a part of the professor? Well, the professor might look down on him, might be racist toward him, or maybe not. Maybe the speaker has developed an aversion to all white people due to the systematic racism in America and due to the history of slavery and colonization. And why wouldn't the professor want to be a part of the speaker? Maybe he looks down on black people. Maybe he sees black people as being violent, unrefined, criminal in nature, incapable of academic pursuit. These are the stereotypes he might hold. However, maybe the professor wants nothing to do with the student Because when he looks at this black boy, he feels guilt and shame for his white privilege, for the systematic oppression that white people have been putting black people under for hundreds of years. It is important to note that these two lines aren't really talking about the individuals of the speaker and the teacher, but rather the general races of black and white. The speaker is making quite a fundamental and controversial statement in these lines. He's saying, even though there is racial segregation, even though you might see me as being very different from you, we're ultimately connected. We're ultimately the same, like it or not. This prestigious school on the hill, full of white people, is not so much different from Harlem below it. We are all people. We all have similar desires, similar fears. And in the next line, the speaker says, but we are. That's true. So he's confirming that whether or not they want to be connected, they are connected, and they might as well accept it. The connection that links people together transcends race. It transcends long histories of oppression. It transcends hatred, fear, and mistrust. By the way, the word true here is very important, as it signals a resolution, a solution to the problem posed in the beginning. Remember, way back in stanza 1, the instructor told the speaker that he must write a paper that is true. Here, the boy seems to have found this truth he was looking for. He is no longer uncertain and hesitant. The professor asked him, "Boy, who are you?" And the boy has essentially answered, "Sir, I am you." We can find our identities in each other, in how connected we all are, regardless of race. The next two lines continue this idea. The speaker learns from the teacher in a student-teacher relationship, but also in a man-to-man, human-to-human relationship. And the white teacher learns from the black student as well. Because of each other, they can now learn to appreciate a different race, a different culture. But the speaker says, "I guess you can learn from me. I guess." Is he still hesitant and uncertain? I don't think so. I think the speaker is trying to maintain a conversational and humble tone in his assignment. Remember, this is an assignment he's writing to his teacher. He doesn't want to sound like a know-it-all or sound overconfident. He is the student here, after all. Also, he might say, "I guess," because in the end, it is up to the professor whether or not he actually learns from the student. We also know that he is certain of what he's saying when we look at how the poem's structure has come together at the end. Look at the end rhymes here. We have true and you, me, free, and be. The last two lines of the stanza take us from the ideology and back to the harsh reality. In the end, despite their connection and fundamental similarities, there remains a societal difference between the speaker and his teacher. The teacher is older, and so he might have more money, more wisdom, and so on. But more importantly, the teacher is white, and so he is freer than the black student. He has more opportunity and more latitude for upward mobility than the black student. Still, those differences aren't enough to ultimately separate the two. We know this because of the strong use of understatement in these two lines. He puts "and white" between dashes, which in this case act as parentheses, brackets. It's as if the whiteness of the professor is an afterthought, a minimal point. Also, he says somewhat more free, which means the difference in freedom between the two is not so significant. The point is, the racial privilege of the professor and the prejudice, racism, and isolation the student faces are not strong enough to break the connection between them. At the end, we are reminded that this long roller coaster ride is a simple one-page assignment. But there's a bit of irony here, because there's nothing simple about this deep truth the speaker has unearthed. The speaker says, "This is my page for English B." But what he really means is, this is my truth, our truth. This is the truth not just about who I am, but about who you are. And as always, thanks for watching.